Hey guys, how's it going? So today I'm going to show you how to make this awesome large standing cabinet. And this is something I am making for my new shop, and I'm really excited about it. These plans will be up on my website if you're interested in making one of your own. With that being said, let's get to work. Making these cabinets out of 5/8 inch MDF. I didn't really want to go with 3/4 as it would cost a little more, and also I knew it would add a good bit of weight. Also, I had a good bit of this 5/8 inch laying around the shop that I had gotten previously. So I started to dimension all the lumber using a circular saw and a guide, just because I didn't feel comfortable running these really large heavy panels through my table saw to dimension them. One thing to remember when using a circular saw to do dimensioning, make sure to add the width of your base plate from the edge of your base plate to the edge of your saw blade to get an accurate cut. After getting some of the cross cuts done with the circular saw, I moved on to using my Metabow HTP table saw, and this saw done really well and kind of surprised me as it handled the size of these sheets really well for a contractor saw, so this was a little surprising to me. But I was able to jump back and forth between the table saw and circular saw and make breaking down all of this MDF much easier and much more accurate. One other thing I will highly recommend if you're breaking down larger sheets like this is to have a extra set of hands to help catch things like the drop-offs. If not, make sure to have plenty of support to catch them, as if they try to tip while you're making the cut, it can bind up on the saw and either mess up your cut or cause a big safety hazard. If the falling piece causes the blade to bind up, it can cause a kickback, and that can be very dangerous. So again, just make sure that your material is completely supported, or having extra hands around to grab the pieces that are going to fall and keep them from just falling down really helps out. The same thing goes for using the table saw. I wound up going and grabbing some of these Cobalt outfeed rollers, and they are an absolute lifesaver. You'll see here shortly that I use them in a few different ways to help me do things like the dados, as well as supports for supporting the material to take measurements and things like that. With all of the boards cut to dimension, it was time to start adding the dados. Now, I went back and forth referring to the SketchUp model to ensure that I was dadoing the correct edges on the correct boards, as well as dadoing the correct widths. And another thing that helps out a lot, especially while cutting the dados for things like the back and the shelves, is to do one board and then move to the next, making sure to leave the table saw set for both boards. That way you ensure that you're getting the exact same cut on the corresponding pieces. Don't be afraid to go back and forth between the SketchUp and your piece and make sure that all your distances are correct. You want to do this to ensure that you're getting the proper sizing, as well as swapping back and forth between the corresponding boards for the corresponding cuts to make sure they all line up properly. And as you could see from what I said before, I used the outfeed rollers here to help support the boards I was using that were going to be much longer than the edge of the saw, and this just made managing the longer boards much easier and much more manageable by myself. With all the dados in place, it was time to paint the doors and the sides of the cabinet, prepping them for the epoxy pours I was going to do. I just wanted these things to look really cool, so I used some Total Boat epoxy along with some KP Pigments colors, and I was going to do a bit of a marbled style technique, but I decided not to do that just because of how the colors wound up laying out. I was afraid that it wouldn't look quite right. It would have still looked cool to have a red and black marble, but I just kind of decided to go with more of a random feathery technique, kind of like it was flames going across a silver and black marble background. So to do this, I start off by pouring some of the Total Boat tabletop epoxy to the top of the boards, and then using a flattener to pull the epoxy around near the edges. Now, you don't want to instantly start pulling it off the edges, or you could possibly pull too much epoxy off of the boards and then would have to keep adding more. You also want to allow for time for the epoxy to flatten itself out. So this is a self-flattening epoxy and self-leveling. So after it sets for a few seconds, it will actually flatten out really well. Then I added the color. I used a little bit of each color and then just randomly stirred in some of the pieces and used a heat gun to feather out the edges and move it around and give it a really cool random patterned look. After both of these were done, I went back and hit everything again with the heat gun and a torch just to ensure all the air bubbles on the surface were popped, and then I moved on to the doors. The exact same technique was taken for the doors. I just decided to do them one at a time as I didn't have a lot of room in the floor of the shop to move around on the pieces of plastic I'd laid down. You can do this however you would like with whatever colors. This is completely a custom pattern and it's something that I just thought would look cool myself. And I really like the color layout between the battleship gray paint and the black and red epoxy. Now, you can also use alcohol inks, which give a really cool effect, but for this one, I decided to use just epoxy on all four sides that were going to be visible on the cabinet. There was no need to do the top of the cabinet or the bottoms, just they wouldn't be seen, so there was no need of spending the money or using a bunch of epoxy that did not have to be used, as it would never be seen anyway. Another thing that you can also do is use a paintbrush to dab the colors around, which will cause them to feather out and spread into each other just a little bit more, giving this really wispy look even more of a drastic effect. I did have one panel that I did get a little bit of red in too much of one spot, as you can see, but it still looks amazing when it's done. With the Total Boat epoxy, you need to let the tabletop dry for at least 8 hours, so I gave it about 24 before moving on to assembling the cabinet. Using these Irwin corner jigs, this made things much easier. Now, I did have an extra set of hands helping me, but this made getting the corners lined up in square using a speed square much easier and much faster, and it also just helped hold them upright so you didn't need as many hands. And after that, I decided I was going to attach the top and the bottom of the cabinet along with the screws in the outside with two brackets on each side of each panel. I just wanted this extra little bit of support, and I thought it would help keep the frame of the cabinet square until we got everything completely installed. Make sure to countersink the holes for the screws, but make sure not to go through the outside of the panels. I repeated this process on the bottom edge of the cabinet. On the bottom panel, there is one dado for a vertical divider. I will be adding two smaller drawers in this area later on, but it's not something you have to do, and I didn't put it in the SketchUp plans as I didn't figure most people would want a set of drawers inside a cabinet that's already going to have doors closing it off. This is just something I want to add as a personal preference later on. After the top and bottom panel were in place with the brackets, I went ahead and added some of the screws that were going to be used to secure the panels in place to the side by countersinking and installing some 2.5-inch gray wood screws. Now, I didn't want to do this on both the top and bottom panel at the same time, as this would tighten up the seams of the cabinet and make installing the shelves a little more difficult. So I went ahead and put the shelves into place. As you can see, I had not painted the edges of the shelves. This was just because it was going to be easier to paint them with them in place inside the cabinet as to try to prop each one up and keep the edges from touching anything. After getting all of the shelves installed, I secured all of them in place using the same 2.5-inch screws, making sure to countersink all of the holes so that the screws would sit a little beyond flush and have a nice clean look to them. With the cabinet completely assembled, I moved on to installing the door hinges. I measured 13 7/8 inches from the top and bottom of the door to ensure the 48-inch piano hinges would be centered on the side of the door, and then screwed them all into place. Then, using one of the test dado pieces that were set for 5/16 of an inch, I laid that underneath the door to support it at the proper height to ensure that it had the right gap between the top of the cabinet and the bottom and would allow it to swing open freely. After that, it's just a simple fact of countersinking and installing all of the screws through both sides of the hinges. Make sure not to skip any screws, as these will be holding all of the weight of these pretty large doors. After that, I installed magnetic clasps to keep the doors closed when they're closed. Now it was time to move on to making the custom door pulls I wanted to make. I wanted these to contain my logo, and I was going to be using the CNC to create them. So I got on VCarve Pro and created two 4-inch round circles that had my logo inside, and then two 2.5-inch circles with an open spot in the center just to lighten them up a little bit. These would be the backers for the larger 4-inch circles on the front, with my logo 3D cut out of the front of the door pulls. Using a 1/8-inch downcut bit from Bits and Bits, I opened up UCCNC to use the I2R8 and cut out this really cool looking door pull. Now, UCCNC is an awesome program. As you can see, once you open up the cut file, the G code for this, it shows you what it's going to look like, and then you pretty much just set your tool to the corner, Z out your X and Y axis and your Z axis using the touch off pad, which makes things much easier, making sure you have the exact right depth for all the cuts on your project. With your machine set up, simply hit start cycle, and this will start your machine, get it to speed, and start making the cut. And you can actually watch on UCCNC where the machine is in the pattern. And this is really nice in that you can watch your machine, and if it seems like it's somewhere it shouldn't be, you know something is wrong, and to stop the machine and take a look at it. After the door pulls were completely cut out, I used some sandpaper to smooth off where the tabs had been to hold them in place, and then countersunk 4 holes, 2 in each of the backer plates for the door pulls, so I could use short screws to attach the backer plates to the front of the door pulls. I knew I wanted these to be black to match the color scheme of the cabinet, so I just used some simple black spray paint to get a nice clean black look to them, and then went back later on and added some of the Battleship Gray paint to the outside of my logo's letters just to give them a little bit of contrast. After that, I marked off a spot 34 inches from the top of the door and 3 inches in. This would be the center of the door pull, and knowing that I had an 1.5 inch diameter or width to the wall of the backer plate, I moved in about an inch or 3/4 of an inch to each side of the center point, and this would be where I could drill pilot holes to install and attach the door pulls to the doors of the cabinet. Doing this on both of the doors on the cabinet would also ensure that the door pulls were located at the same height and one would not be higher than the other or further away from the inner seam of the doors than the other. I then mounted the door pulls using some 1.5-inch wood screws, and this gave me a nice firm hold to the door pulls so I did not have to worry about them coming off. What a wild ride this thing has been. So I hope you guys like the cabinet. I love the thing. I am very, very happy with how it came out. This was a massive undertaking for me, as I have a little bit of help, but it's kind of hard doing these big builds, and I really needed the storage here in the new shop. I'm trying to get in here and get to actually getting some projects knocked out and putting out more content, but it's hard to do that when I don't have it set up yet to work. And one of the main things was getting some storage. That was what was just massively lacking in my small shop. Is one, the room to put storage, and two, not having any made everything a cluttered mess, which made trying to work in the shop absolutely horrible. So you might be asking yourself why why I did a epoxy cabinet, and why not? I just thought it would be cool, to be honest. I wanted to do something that, as you can see, is going to be somewhat of a backdrop for some of the videos coming up. And I just wanted to do something cool to show that I could do it, really. I mean, to be honest, it just looked like a lot of fun, and I like doing weird stuff. So that being said, guys, let me know in the comments what you think of the cabinet. What colors would you have went with? If you like it, let me know. I am going to have plans for this up on the website. This is a pretty simple build as far as plan-wise and cut lists and things like that. So that being said, I hope you guys absolutely love the thing. I really do. And I hope you had fun watching me go through this massive pain in the butt to build this thing. And like I said, I'm wore out right now. It's really late at night, and I just now finished it. And man, I'm just kind of beside myself because this has been about a week and a half or so in the making, just because I have to split my time between the two shops until I get in here permanently. So the Metabow or Hitachi table saw got used a lot during this build. It's the first few times I've got to use it, and I really like this table saw so far. It does its job well, and it makes pretty accurate cuts. And I did a lot of the breakdown with the DeWalt circular saw. That thing is a beast. I have a Triton track saw here without the track. I got it from a friend who wound up having a little bit of a bigger setup and he just didn't use it much. So I got it from him. And the Triton track saw and the DeWalt circular saw, I think I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison because there's a pretty big difference in price, if I'm not mistaken, and it's also a huge difference in how they cut. So that video will be coming out later on. But yeah, all the tools I used will be listed in the comments with links in the comments. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed watching this again. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and make sure to give a thumbs up, like the video. That really helps the channel grow, and the more this channel grows, the more I can put out cool content like this and maybe some more interesting stuff that you haven't seen before. So I really appreciate it. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at jpaynewoodworking, and go to the website, check out the article. get the plans, make your own, and shoot me some pictures. I want to see. So guys, I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys later.